My fiancé Addie and I wanted to go see her relatives in Colombia in September last year. She already had their blessing to marry me, even though she didn't need it, but she still wanted to go. She just wanted everyone to meet me, and for me to get a mental picture of the people and places from her childhood. The open fields behind the Soto house, land of the rolling tractors. I was really looking forward to it. During the 2020 lockdown, I'd taken a lot of Spanish classes, and I'd gotten plenty of opportunity to practice with Addie. I was getting pretty good at it. When the time came, we took a flight to Benito Salas and got picked up by her Aunt Mariana and Uncle Cisco. For a Midwesterner like me, it was like stepping into another world. You had to rely on other people to a much greater extent than back home. There was a guy for everything. They loved having me there, and they had heard nothing but good things about me from Addie. We had a lot in common, and I stayed up drinking with Cisco late into the night. It took me some time to get used to speaking Spanish, and I was far from fluent, but Cisco appreciated the effort. Long after Addie called it a night, I was still up having a laugh with Uncle Cisco. We were both huge ZZ Top fans, and his Spanish rendition of Sharp Dressed Man had me in tears. The next day we went on our merry way just past noon, after a hearty lunch and breakfast. Cisco let us borrow one of his cars. I was still hungover, so Addie had to take the wheel. She didn't mind. She didn't trust me to handle Colombian traffic anyway. I have no idea how long I slept, but at least 3 hours, on and off. Addie didn't mind, but couldn't stop herself from teasing me. The word lightweight was thrown around. Cisco drinks that stuff like water, she smiled. You better get used to it. There's going to be a lot of that at the wedding. We'd settled on having our wedding back home in Minnesota. We'd decided on 40 guests each. I had trouble finding that many guests, while she had trouble keeping down the numbers. Both Mariana and Cisco were on the list, of course. We were driving out to an area called Vacío. I'm not too sure about the name. They called it various nicknames like Vacío, and it seemed to be more of an area rather than a village. It was the birthplace of Addie's grandparents, and she had a lot of distant family living there. Like, half the people there are my family, she explained. The other half are just saving up to leave. Didn't sound too cheerful, but you gotta take everything Addie says with a grain of salt. Most of it is hidden under 3 to 4 layers of smirking. We stopped for dinner at a small restaurant in Florencia. We got some bottled water from the corner store, and I took the wheel. Now I was a well-rested lightweight after all. I picked up a few more snacks and sodas just to make sure I wouldn't run into a hangry Addie down the road. As the sun started to set, Addie glued herself to a map. She'd been here hundreds of times, but she'd never driven here on her own. She was unsure about the back roads, and there weren't many signs. As I mentioned, there were all kinds of nicknames for that area. We just headed for the town of El Doncheo, looking for any roads leading us out into Vacío along the way. We had to retrace our steps a few times, ask a few locals, and stop to get gas a couple of times. Cisco's car was kind of shitty, to be honest. We finally found a road leading us west out of El Donchelo, into a barely accessible forest road. Addie sighed with relief, however. She was finally recognizing the area. This took longer than expected. There were several forks in the road that lead to a series of dead ends, mostly abandoned farmsteads and a few warehouses. Addie was pissed. None of that had been there when she was a kid, and it was messing with her internal compass. It gets very dark at night, especially in the middle of the Colombian wilderness. We pushed forward, but the road was so bad that I could hear the undercarriage scrape against the road whenever there was a large bump or rock. At one point, we had to stop and get out of the car to move a large tree that had fallen over. Addie was about to fall asleep in the car, but she tried her best to keep her spirits up. I kissed her cheek. "Take a nap," I said. "I'll move it. I'll wake you when I see something." "Tonterías!" Addie spat, annoyed. "If we're both lightweights, we won't get anywhere." She brought our bags out, chugged a soda, and sugar rushed the tree off the road. I barely helped. Lightweight. What an amazing woman. We moved the tree out of the way, and Addie just stopped to stare down the road for a while. This was it. This was the road to Vacío. She didn't need to say it. I could see her relaxing. "There's at least 24 buildings up ahead," she said. "Just further down the road, with a sharp turn at the well. And then it's straight to bed. No drinks with any uncles?" "No drinks," Addie agreed. I knew what she was about to call me, but the word never came. She just smirked at me. Her smirk faded with a strange metallic sound. There was a careful pitter-patter of paws against the dry mud. We turned back towards our car, only to see a pack of wild dogs. There had to be at least 9 of them, ragged and mangy. Except, it wasn't us that they were circling. No, they were gnawing on the car. One of them was standing on the trunk of the car, pressing its teeth against the metal. Another was gnawing on the side of the open passenger door. One was considering taking a bite out of one of the wheels, but settled on a hubcap instead. They were so ferocious that their teeth bent and buckled against the metal, but it didn't seem to stop them. Instead, they were just growing more desperate, cutting themselves against the sharp edges. Addie took a step forward towards the car to scare them off, but I could tell something was wrong. The dogs weren't backing down. Instead, they stepped up, growling through bleeding gums. They were protecting the alpha, a particularly large white dog. It had blood all over its mouth, making its teeth look like protruding bones from a fresh wound. The pack was ready to accept the challenge, and Addie quickly realized we were outnumbered. We backed away, watching the dogs crawl and bite all over Uncle Cisco's car. The alpha, calmly, started biting the edge of the hood cover. We continued on foot. Luckily, we had our bags. It didn't take long for the headlights of the car to go out, leaving us in darkness. I grasped Addie's hand and just kept heading straight down the road, turning a sharp right at the well. It was uncomfortable not knowing what could be waiting on the dark road, just under our feet. And there were a lot of unfamiliar sounds all around us. Even Addie seemed distressed. The image of that large white dog had been burned into our eyes. The forest suddenly opened into a large open field. As a rusted sign told us, this was La Bosque Vacío, one enormous field in the middle of a forest leading up into the mountains. The entire area had a slight lean to it, making every step forward seem like a tiny bit uphill. Along a main road were 12 houses on each side, mostly small one-story buildings, but 2 larger houses at the very end, along with several storage sheds. Not a single car, and not a single light. In the dark, it looked abandoned. As we walked up the main road, it hit me just how quiet it all was. Addie was getting anxious. Then, just a bit further down the road, there was a figure walking towards us. "Hey!" Addie called out. "Are you Soto?" The family name. It was equal parts name and verb in these parts. To be Soto was not just to be a family member, but to live up to their principles and values. "Who are you?" the man answered. "Alvarez?" He was biting on some kind of beef jerky, having real trouble chewing it. His head twitched as he pulled off little pieces, swallowing them whole. "The others are out," he continued. "We'll be back in the morning." "What are they doing?" asked Addie. "What's going on? Who is he?" The man just stopped chewing. It was dark, and I couldn't see him, but I saw that his head stopped moving. He was staring right at me. "I'm her fiancé," I responded. "Pleased to meet you." "American?" he asked. "You looking for someone? American?" "We're here to see the family," groaned Addie. "I'm Soto." The man lit a flashlight, blinding us. He was in his early 50s, pot-bellied, and hiding his long hair under an oil-stained hat. He was pale as death and covered in orange stains. He coughed, violently. "Sure you are," he nodded. "They'll be back in the morning. Sleep wherever. Nothing is locked." "Yaya always locks the doors," Addie said, shielding herself from the bright light. "There are no locks left." The man walked past us, taking another bite out of his beef jerky. Only it wasn't beef jerky. It was stripped copper cables. Addie walked me up to the main house on the left side of the road. The Soto house. Still not a car in sight. It was pitch black, but Addie knew the way by heart. She tried turning on the lights as we pushed past the open front door, but nothing seemed to work. In the dark, I could only guess to the state of the place, but judging from the amount of debris I had to step over, it had fallen into disarray. Addie clenched my hand and led me upstairs to one of the guest rooms. It was a small room with a leaning ceiling and a large round window looking out over the open fields. If it hadn't been such a cloudy night, it could have been beautiful. Now, it was just a sea of black. I could hear Addie sniffle. I hugged her as she snuggled up against my shoulder. "Something is wrong. This is all wrong," she whispered. I kissed her forehead and held her tight. She was right. Something about this was all wrong. I had only seen her cry a handful of times, and this was downright heartbreaking. I fell in and out of sleep that night, barely getting any rest. Addie had to get up at least 3 times, taking a walk to calm her nerves. She was anxious, that much I could tell, but she didn't want to talk about it. "Let's just wait until morning." "I'm not feeling well," she said as she got back for the 3rd time. "There's no point in guessing." The next morning, a pale sun lit up the open fields. Addie woke me up just after sunrise, pulling on my arm. She looked downright spooked, and as I looked out, I could see why. At least 14 cars had been parked in the middle of the field outside. All were broken down, torn apart, and completely rusted. Car doors had been torn off, along with trunk and hood covers. Car parts were scattered all over the open field, in various stages of deconstruction. All of it, however, was rusted. "Even the tractors," said Addie, pointing towards a couple of wrecks over by the storage sheds. "Who did this?" "The others should be back soon," I said. "I'm sure there's an answer." "Sure, maybe." Most of the house seemed ruined. The downstairs couch had been ripped apart. Wallpaper had been torn down. Not a single pan or pot was left in the kitchen, and the TV had been picked to pieces. The whole place seemed abandoned. Still, just outside, there were plenty of people walking about like nothing had ever happened. Addie had gone from worried to downright mad. I followed her outside. There was a woman sitting down on a bench on the other side of the road, wiping her son's mouth. He couldn't have been more than 7 years old, holding a little plastic bucket with a few screws rustling around. Both had the same pale complexion as the man from the other night. Addie walked right up to them, fuming. "What's going on here?" asked Addie. "Where's Yaya?" "Wait," said the woman, wiping her son's mouth. "Who is he? American?" "I'm her—" "Answer the question," Addie demanded. "Ask her yourself," the woman snapped back. She pointed down the road where we could see a group of people pulling Cisco's old car from the forest As we walked away, I heard the kid coughing. The mother wiped his mouth again and gave him a treat. Whatever she gave him, it sounded crunchy, or was his teeth making that awful noise? It was almost 24 people pulling our car out of the woods. The car had been totaled, stripped of most metals and cables. The hood was covered in bloody handprints, and the seats had been ripped apart. No way those dogs could have done all this in a night. Walking next to the young men and women pulling the car along was an older woman, who Addie seemed to recognise. Walking up to them, there was no warm welcome or cheerful greetings. If anything, they were suspicious. I had a hard time keeping up with their discussion. There was a bittersweet reunion. Remember, my Spanish was still pretty basic. The old woman seemed to be Addie's grandmother, but as Addie ran up to her, there were 12 people blocking her path, all with the same pale complexion. The way they confronted Addie reminded me of what the wild dogs had done the previous night. It was such a primal reaction. They looked prepared to attack, despite her recognizing and naming several of them. A cousin, a step-cousin, a half-sister. After a few tense seconds, the old woman stepped in between. She carefully embraced Addie and waved me over. "I'm sorry," she said. "This must be confusing." Yeah, what happened? Did Cisco not tell you we were coming?" "Cisco haven't been out here for a while," she said. "He hasn't seen the changes." "What changes? What happened?" "Come," the old woman said, leading us away from the others. "I'll explain." The car had already started to rust. The old woman explained as we walked back towards the Soto house. Addie tried to stay near and act familiar, but the old woman seemed a bit distant. This wasn't the reunion that Addie had dreamt of. That much was apparent. "It's a sad tale," said the old woman. It had started just a few weeks prior. An American had been passing through the area on foot. He'd been bitten by a snake and came to Vacío for help. The Sotos had taken him in, but it had been too late. As he was choking, everyone had tried to help. Some had gotten towels, others called for help. It was late, and no one was going to make it there in time. In one violent coughing fit, the American had died right there on the road. The old woman even pointed out the spot to us. "He brought a sickness to us," she continued. "We started coughing. See?" She wiped an orange spot from her arm and held it up for us to see. "Rust. A sickness. A curse," said the old woman. "But we have it under control. We just need to feed it for a while until the cure gets here. The more we feed the rust, the less it torments us." "A cure?" asked Addie. "What cure is there?" Yaya held up a hand and coughed into her arm. Another stain of rust, now on her clothes. One of her eyes was looking a bit discoloured. "An exorcist. We just have to wait." "What about the other families? Did they get sick too?" "What other families?" smiled Yaya. "We've lived here on our own for 6 years." Looking around Vacío now, things started to make sense. Most things out of various metals had been stripped and, in turn, devoured. This was how they fed the rust. It seemed to have spread to the local wildlife as well, or at least the dogs. Even some of the flowers in the field were affected, turning a strange, corrosive blue. Still, knowing what was going on seemed to at least calm Addie down a bit. Something had happened, and it all just seemed strange. But everyone was being so collected about it. No big deal, it seemed. They'd gone through worse. They were putting all their bets on the exorcist they'd called in, and his ability to help rid them of this curse. It didn't seem contagious. Yes, it had spread to plants and seemingly wildlife, but not other people. As Yaya said, there had been all kinds of people passing through Vacío since the rust sickness hit them, but no one else seemed affected. It was something local, bound to either the earth or the people. Still, I convinced Addie that we should stick to our bottled water for now. She agreed. We stayed there for 2 more days, living off our own water supply and food. I was introduced to some of Addie's family, even some distant cousins, but everything just seemed overshadowed by the troubles of the village. There were no celebrations, no welcomes, no drinks long into the night like with Uncle Cisco. No, these people seemed beaten and exhausted. Most of the day they were just lounging around, looking for metal to chew. I once woke up from a 16-year-old kid tearing down the gutters to the celebration of his elders. Sounds of metal grinding against teeth in the middle of the night. Pained grunts as they cut themselves on sharp edges. Bloody handprints on the walls from his desperate climbing. One night, as I had trouble sleeping, I took a short walk down the main road. It was a cool night, but not so cold that I couldn't get by in just a t-shirt and a pair of light pants. As I got to the point in the road where the old woman had pointed out that the American had died, I could almost see it. It was like a large circle where the grass had been discolored. It was subtle, but it was there if you knew where to look. Cisco's car was already a wreck a few days ago, but it had been torn apart even more. Most of the frame had completely rusted. Even some of my own metal items, like my keys, had gotten a few spots of rust. It was clear that whatever this was, it was affecting the entire area. Down by the remains of our car was the dog pack again. This time, they all had bloodied mouths. They had gotten hold of a stray animal of some kind, standing in a circle around it. They were licking the blood from it, and the large white dog seemed to bite and twist the flesh loose without eating it. As I backed away, they gave me a contemplative look. It was as if they didn't know whether to chase me down or not. It struck me that I would not have the time to scream for help before they'd be all over me. Dogs are fast, and the Sotos were resting in their homes. A sudden sense of mortality washed over me. This was real, primal. My thoughts rushed as I tried to figure out what I was supposed to do. Should I run, risking a chase? Or should I stand my ground and hope for the best? Should I try to make myself larger? Before I finished my train of thought, the dogs turned their backs on me. They were satisfied with their prey, for now. As the largest dog slurped up a piece of meat, the thought struck me that maybe there were more sources of metals than just metallic items. Maybe other sources worked as well, like an iron-rich liver. Or maybe it was just easier to chew and digest than raw metal. Had the Sotos figured that out too? As I returned to the house, I noticed Addie's Yaya standing in the middle of the living room. Her eyes were closed, her head hanging low. She was this short, frail woman, but I got the impression that there was more to her. They weren't telling me something. They weren't just lethargic. There was something else. And why did some of them seem more alert than others? Like the 16-year-old who climbed the gutters. The thought struck me that I hadn't seen anyone else who lived in the house for a few hours. It was large enough for several families, but all I could see was Yaya standing in the living room. Where were the others? I snuck back up to the guest room, only to find Addie sitting on the edge of the bed. I crouched in front of her, holding her hands. "We gotta go, Addie," I said. "I don't think it's safe anymore." "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she sighed. "I thought we'd have a party, and I'd give them all their invitations. Look, we're almost out of bottled water, and I don't trust whatever comes out of that well right now. We should leave, first thing in the morning." Addie nodded, looking out the window. It was rare seeing her so agreeable. Usually she had something to say. A quip, anything. "I'll take watch," she said. "Just in case." "You sure?" "Of course, lightweight. I can't sleep anyway." We laid down next to each other, and as she pressed against me, I felt myself going numb and warm with the sleep. A worried, anxious sleep. I was convinced Addie would fall asleep too. She seemed a bit sluggish. The sun hadn't yet risen when she woke me up. Maybe an hour had passed, maybe a few minutes. She pressed a finger against my lips, pointing to her ears. I was to shut up and listen, so I did. There was a scream outside, repeated, loud screams. I had never heard anything like it, not even in the movies. I felt my fingers going cold as my heart started pumping adrenaline. We had to leave, right now. I started putting on my clothes. Our bags were already packed. Addie was already dressed to go. "I'm sorry this didn't work out," I said, all things considered. "Fuck that," she said. "I don't care about this anymore. This isn't what I wanted to show you. I just want to get back home. Then let's." She agreed. We hurried down the stairs. Yaya was no longer standing in the living room. The house was empty. Addie put her hand on the door, but I stopped her. Looking out a broken window, I could see a large group of people emerging from the woods. We opted for one of the side windows instead, taking a different route. The first thing I saw outside was the kid from across the street. He was just standing there, out on the street on his own. He'd gotten a hold of a kitchen knife, biting chunks off of it with metallic clinks. He just stared at us, biting, chewing, and bending the sharp metal in his mouth, like a messy eater with an ice cream, only blood running down his cheeks instead of chocolate. He seemed a bit slow. Maybe he hadn't eaten the proper type of metals to feed his rust, unlike the other Sotos. I was frozen in place, but Addie pushed me forward. We had to keep moving. A thought crossed my mind as we passed by the field. There were more cars in the field than there were people living here. Maybe the neighbours never really left. Jesus. We stuck to the tree lines, sneaking forward. More people were coming out of the woods down the main road. First was a group of people carrying 2 wounded. Then, a second group towing a black car. Some of them were carrying flashlights, briefly illuminating the scene in flashes. The 2 wounded were strangers. One of them wearing a black robe, the other, a young woman with similar attire. Both had their abdomens sliced open, but they were still alive. The Sotos were covered in blood. Some were carrying wooden stakes, others carried wooden forks. One of them had a shin bone fashioned into a shiv. They seemed happy, alert, and breathing without obstruction. For all the horror of the scene that played out before me, these people seemed content. I saw the 16-year-old gutter climber there, laughing, chewing, and waving a handmade glass knife around. Not a single cough out of that crowd. Then there was the black car. It had a prominent wooden cross hanging from the rear-view mirror. The exorcist. This was the goddamned exorcist they'd called. I was so lost in my thoughts that I barely noticed a light panning our way. I didn't have time to react as Addie and I were lit up by a stray flashlight, but it wasn't the dozens of eyes staring at me that scared me in that moment. No, it was Addie. Seeing her clearly, she was pale. Rust was running from the corners of her mouth, eyes and ears. Looking down at my hands, I could see rust stains where she'd held my hand. In the bright light, she looked down on herself in disbelief. I only had a small sip, she said. From the well. That first night. There was screaming, laughing. The 2 wounded people were unceremoniously dropped to the ground, where they twisted and turned in pain. Further down the road, I could see the wild dogs lurking, investigating the wounded prey. Again, I was frozen. And yet again, Addie pushed me forward. But this time, she didn't come along with me. She was urging me to run. It was too late for her. I looked back one final time to see Addie going back to her family, never letting me go with her eyes. The Sotos embraced her, finally giving her a warm welcome. Yaya was waiting for her granddaughter with open arms and bloodied teeth, screams and laughter coming my way. They were closing in. I could feel my heart rate explode. It was like the starting shot of a race. I snapped to attention and took off into the woods like a frightened deer. I heard hollering and screaming as branches snapped from the barrage of men running after me. I just kept going. Whenever I found myself out of breath, I just kept hearing Addie's voice, pushing me forward. "Come on, lightweight." Through unfamiliar woods, stumbling over boulders and crossing overgrown roads, I found myself at one of the abandoned farmsteads. I must have run for at least half an hour straight. I waited there, hearing people yelling at each other outside. There was a yell of excitement as they found an old plough that wasn't completely rusted through, and they started dragging it back home to Vacío. They started looting one of the storage sheds, taking everything from the door, hinges to a bucket of nails. As I felt a ray of sunshine poke me in the eye, I realized it was well into the afternoon. I had zoned out for hours. I was okay, physically. I had to leave. It was only a matter of time before people found me wandering the streets. In El Doncello, they thought I'd been kidnapped. At the embassy, they thought I was high. The only ones willing to listen was Mariana and Cisco through a brief phone call. They promised to go check on Addie once they'd talked to the police. I didn't hear from them again. I was put on a plane back home, and that's where this story ends. The answers just end here, abruptly. I'm sorry. I've been back home for months now. There's no cooperation between our government and the Colombians, and no one seems to be willing to even listen to me. Mariana and Cisco never got back to me, and I haven't been able to go back there because of travel restrictions. I don't know what to do anymore. I know Addie is still there, and if there is any way to help her, I must know. I don't know what to do. I miss her so much.